Hello, 6th grade history students, and welcome back to our class. Today we're going to be talking about the Aztec people. We are going to be on page 310 in your history book, and in your workbook we're going to be on page 162. We're going to start in section 10, just as a reminder. The workbook pages are divided, and each section has a little number in the top left corner. We're going to start on section 10. We're going to move to section 11, which is up here. I know this seems kind of weird. That's why I want you to pay attention to the section numbers. And then we'll go back to page 160, and we'll do section 13, 14, and 15. Once we finish all of these, if you want to, you can follow the instructions to cut these apart and make a codex. You follow the page numbers and you glue them together, and then you can glue them on covers and fold them so that they're an accordion style codex, which is the kind of books that the ancient Native Americans used. So let's get started, shall we? Again, we're on 310 in our book, 162 in your workbook. The Aztecs. Where did the Aztecs come from? Some historians think that the Aztecs migrated south. They migrated from somewhere in North America and migrated south and settled in the area that we now know as Mexico. If you look on page 310 in your book, you can see a map of the Aztec Empire, and this map pictures the southern part of Mexico. If you want to get a better idea of exactly where this is in relationship to other countries, you can go back to page 292, and you can look at the map there, and you can see the different empires that we studied and where they were located. And you can see that the Aztec Empire was located in southern Mexico, modern day Mexico. Now, the Aztecs are the last empire that we're going to study as far as Mesoamerica goes, because they were the last empire, the last people left standing in Mesoamerica as far as the native populations went. There are still Aztecs, people of Aztec descent, living in Mexico today. You can still find them. Some of their culture is still intact, and interestingly enough, some of the cultures, the native cultures of the area, sort of blended with the Spanish culture to make the unique cultures that are part of Mexico and Central America and South America today. So we are in the 1400s. So we're getting closer to the Spanish conquistadors coming to North and South America. By the 1400s, the people in this region, in this southern region of Mexico, had developed into what we know as the Aztec civilization. The Aztecs had some pretty shocking religious customs, some things that might surprise you or maybe not, depending on how familiar you are with the Aztecs. But along with some of those pretty shocking and primitive customs, they also were able to, at the same time, develop a language and some pretty advanced technology. I have always found the Aztecs a very interesting, fascinating culture, group of people. I do have several books here in my classroom that talk about the Aztec people. They are here. You can check them out. If you want one of them, for sure you can check out. A couple are on my shelf that I use pretty regularly, but you're welcome to come and look at them, or next year when school starts again and maybe you finished an assignment early, you can say, hey, Mrs. Hanson, about those Aztecs. And I'll be happy to get my books out and let you look at them. This is really, really cool information, some amazing pictures of artifacts and that kind of thing. And I love to share that stuff. You guys know me. The Aztecs had a legend. And this legend claimed that their sun god, they had multiple gods, but their sun god would lead them to a place where he wanted them to build a city. The place that they eventually settled was in a swampy lake. Instead of being like, ugh, why here? They trusted that their God had led them there for a reason, and they accepted this. Okay, this is where we're going to build. And so they built their city on Lake Texcoco, and they built what would become one of the largest cities in the world at that time. It is pretty spectacular. You can actually go to Mexico City today, and you can see some of the Aztec ruins in the middle of Mexico City, which is currently one of the largest cities in the world. And there are active archaeological digs all over that city. It's on my bucket list to see some of them, to go down to Mexico City someday and be able to see some of those archaeological digs. So the Aztecs began building this city on two small islands in the middle of this lake. The city that they built was called Tenochtitlan, and I always have trouble pronouncing that, so you might want to look it up and see if you can find somebody to pronounce it better than I can. But Tenochtitlan is built on, like I said, the site where Mexico City stands today. So this is the same place where Mexico City is. In fact, a few of the things we're going to be talking about, I will let you know. For instance, the Templo Mayor, which we're going to be talking about, is one of the excavation sites in modern-day Mexico City that you can go down and you can see. There's a museum there. One of the books I have has a really cool picture of it. I am going to switch marker colors, and I'm going to do that to signify when I'm switching sections on the pages. So we're going to move from section 10 to section 11. Like I said, Lake Texcoco was where the Aztecs built one of the largest cities in the world at the time. If you hear giggling in the background, that is because my daughter is in the classroom here, and she has finished with her schoolwork today and is watching some funny videos and has forgotten that I'm videoing. So if you hear giggling in the background, it's not because she thinks that I'm funny, for sure. Okay, so this is kind of interesting because they're building in this lake. So they want to create extra land, and so they created some of these garden islands. And the way they did that was they gathered twigs and limbs and sticks and kind of gathered them into a pile in the middle of this swampy lake, and then piled silt or topsoil on top of it, and they made these garden islands, which they called chinampas. Chinampas. Because silt is such a fertile soil, plants grew easily there and put down roots, and they were able to create all of these little islands in Lake Texcoco. Another thing that they did was they made causeways. Causeways are bridges made out of land bridges to connect the islands in the lake to the mainland. Then they designed canals, and these canals were able to separate fresh water from salt water and would keep the drinking water supply in good order. They also built these canals so that canoes could travel easily back and forth. The Aztecs, unlike the Maya, were a united people. So their population grew, and city-states would form alliances with other city-states. The military power grew, and they began to conquer people in the surrounding areas around Tenochtitlan. As early as the beginning of the 1500s, Tenochtitlan was large and in charge. This was the dominant city in the region. It was a wealthy city, it was a beautiful city, and it was well known, and it was feared. The people understood the power that came from this place, and the kings that ruled in that city were the ones who were in charge. At one point, Tenochtitlan had a population of around 200,000 people. So this is a big city, especially for this time period. But even nowadays, this would be, well, this is a pretty good sized city. Many religious buildings, many kinds of activities, marketplaces, all kinds of things. And as I mentioned earlier, the Templo Mayor was a great pyramid. It was a very important temple in the Aztec religion in the city of Tenochtitlan. And this is a place where you can go to in modern-day Mexico City today. Pardon me. And you can see the archaeological dig there, the Templo Mayor. And this was where many of their religious ceremonies and rituals took place. Now, let's talk about the Aztec religion, because this is pretty shocking, I think, to some people. If you've read the Old Testament, again, like I said yesterday, you probably have read about Baal worship and the worship of Moloch, and how human sacrifice was required at times for those gods, and so you won't be too surprised by the Aztec religion. The Aztec religion was very entrenched in all aspects of Aztec society. The Olmecs and the Mayas followed religious beliefs, but the Aztecs took that to a whole other level. The Aztecs believed that their sun god had an insatiable appetite for blood and for human hearts. Yes, you heard that right. Human hearts. Again, I'm trying to find videos about the Aztec religion. It's a little hard to find one that's not kind of graphic because of some of their practices. The Aztec sun god had to be constantly appeased. They believed that their whole world was at risk if they did not keep their sun god happy. The Spanish conquistador, Hernando Cortez, came from Spain, and he was not a nice person, but even he was pretty horrified by the ritual sacrifices of the Aztecs. Is it an S? Yeah. Cortez. Hernando Cortez. We are moving on to page 160. And so we're going to a new section, section 13. Make sure when you're looking at this that you're on section 13, because it is at the bottom of this page. So we're continuing to talk about a contrast between the Aztec religion and the Bible. According to Romans 1:19 through 23, the way that salvation comes is the gospel. The gospel message is the power of God to bring salvation. To bring salvation. Mesoamericans believed in many gods. They believed that there were multiple gods. But the Bible teaches, of course, and you know, that there is only one true God. Mesoamericans worshipped nature rather than the Creator. Sometimes we say that people worship the creation instead of the Creator, and that was true of Mesoamerican people. If you're wondering where I am in the book, I'm on 312. There's a box at the bottom right corner called Mesoamerican Beliefs. The Old Testament taught that animal sacrifice was necessary, and you remember this, of course, that the Jewish people for some reason that didn't look right to me for a second, that the Jewish people had animal sacrifices, but when the New Testament came and Jesus came, he made one sacrifice, and the New Testament teaches that that's the only sacrifice necessary, that the only sacrifice necessary was the sacrifice of the Son of God. It's an interesting thing to juxtapose, this idea of sacrifice and what it looks like in different cultures and different religions. But the Aztec religion was particularly brutal in its sacrifices, and we're going to be touching on that again in a little bit. I'm going to erase this so that I can have some more room to write. Okay. So we're on section 14 now, and we're going to talk about Aztec social classes and their economy. So on page 313 in your book, if you read at the top, it talks about Aztec warriors. Aztec warriors begin training at a very young age. They were very young, very small boys, much like the Spartans, if you remember them. When they went to war, they believed they were showing respect to their gods, and men were expected to prove that they were worthy out on the battlefield. As warriors, they were expected to be brave and noble. Brave and noble. Most Aztec weapons were designed to stun and capture their enemies instead of kill them or even seriously wound them because, well, we'll get to that in a second. You'll figure it out. Okay, in the social classes of the Aztecs were really similar to other Mesoamerican civilizations. Very similar to the Olmecs, very similar to the Maya. The nobility would live in beautiful brick or stone homes. Common people lived in homes made of twigs and mud. Tenochtitlan and the Aztec Empire had the same ruler. So unlike the Mayas, remember what I said a few minutes ago, the Aztecs were an empire and they had one ruler. All of the officials were expected to pay tribute to the Aztec ruler. He was considered to be a descendant of the gods, same as in the Mayan civilization. And Aztec nobility, warriors, and priests were responsible for supporting the Aztec ruler. The common people included artisans, soldiers, laborers, farmers, merchants, and they were all expected to support the nobles. The women worked hard at home, caring for the home and the families. And in the Aztec culture, a commoner had very little opportunity to raise his or her status in life. If you were born a peasant, you were probably going to die a peasant. You didn't leave your social class. The Aztec economy was built on a lot of hard work. Citizens were expected to help in building projects, like for instance building the dikes, which are walls that would prevent flooding. Remember, Tenochtitlan was built in the middle of a lake. Temples, roads, aqueducts, all these construction projects you were expected to help with if you were an Aztec citizen. The Aztec economy was very specialized. They produced some goods inside the Aztec Empire: tools, potteries, figurines, jewelry, cloth, baskets. Farming was important as well in the Aztec people. They would, of course, trade with other people. The Aztecs wanted gold, they wanted salt, and they wanted cloth. And they would trade with other people to do it, and the things that they would trade included jaguar skins, tropical bird feathers, rubber, cotton, and cacao beans. Language and technology. The Aztecs developed a written language, which is a big deal. And like the Mayas, the Aztecs used hieroglyphs. For their writing. You can actually see on page 314 and on page 315 a couple of pictures from some different codices that show some of the Aztec writing. This written language was used, and they would record this not just using for business records, but also some of their history as well, their customs and their beliefs. And what this did was, like in every other culture that has a written language, it helped to unify the culture and to pass it down and to keep it intact for years to come. The Aztecs developed their technology based on the knowledge that they had gained from the Mayan people. And they used that and they built on it. So they took the technology from the Mayas and they sort of ran with it, much like we do nowadays, right? You've got one technology that somebody develops and somebody else goes, ooh, hey, I can make that better, or I can do this other thing with it. And the Aztecs did that as well. The Aztec number system and their knowledge of the solar system were very, very advanced compared to other cultures of the time period. The Aztecs also developed a lot of different kinds of medicines that were actually useful and good for people. Different kinds of ointments, different kinds of tonics, things that would heal outside and inside the body. One of the things that's interesting is the Aztecs didn't have access to iron. They did not have access to bronze, but they were still able to make a lot of tools that were well made, and they were able to use. They, in fact, one of the examples our books give is that they were able to make drills out of bones or reeds, so that was kind of cool. The Aztecs did not have horses, and they did not have mules or other beasts of burden. In fact, it was the Spanish that brought horses to the New World for the first time. So horses did not exist in North and South America until they were brought over by the Spanish. So how did they get things from one place to another? Well, they used dugout canoes. So a dugout canoe is you take a tree, right? You fell the tree, and then you dig out the inside and you shape it so that you can sit in it and go. And because they had all these canals, they were able to get in their canoes. You can see on page 315 a picture from one of the Aztec codices that shows the use of dugout canoes. So what happened to the Aztecs? Well, the Spanish happened. Spaniards happened, the conquistadors. There was an Aztec emperor named Montezuma, and he was the emperor when the Spanish conquistadors came. You may see it spelled a couple of different ways. This is how our book spells it. Montezuma II. He was the emperor when the Spanish conquistadors came. They began landing in 1519. In less than a year, Hernando Cortez, we talked about him earlier, in less than a year, he had entered the city of Tenochtitlan, and there are there are several different stories about what happened, but one of the things that we know is that Montezuma really wasn't sure how he would respond to this. Some historians think, and this is something that I've read in several different places, that some historians think that Montezuma thought that Cortez was an Aztec god, was a human manifestation of an Aztec god who was supposed to return that year. Cortez got lucky, I think, in when he came, because this Aztec legend said that this god was supposed to return in this year from the east, which is where Cortez came from. And Cortez was a white man. The Spaniards were white people, and they fit this description in Aztec literature of this god. And so Montezuma was like, what do I do here? Eventually, he invites Cortez in. He gives him lots of presents of gold and silver. And to thank him, Cortez seized the city, took Montezuma hostage. Now, one of Montezuma's other problems was that the Aztec people weren't really fond of him. He issued a lot of taxes. It was a very heavy tax burden. He was not a well-liked ruler. And because of that, when Cortez brings Montezuma before the people, he expects them to back down, but instead they actually start throwing things. And Montezuma was hit by a stone while trying to talk to his subjects. The people were so unhappy with him that they were throwing rocks at him. He was hit by a stone and died 3 days later. And because of that, Cortez and the conquistadors gained control of Tenochtitlan and much of the surrounding territories. Much of the surrounding territories. So, what happened to the Mesoamericans? Why was this well-trained Aztec army? Because this was not a bunch of untrained people. Why did this well-trained Aztec army get defeated so quickly? We've got several possible reasons. One is that some of the Aztec religious beliefs and superstitions led to their downfall. They believed that the enemy was a tool of the gods. We talked about how Montezuma thought Hernando Cortez might have been one of their gods that was supposed to return. Well, the Aztecs outnumbered the Spaniards by a lot, but because they were so afraid of offending their gods, they were not really able to fight back, to strip them of a lot of their power. In addition to this, the Aztecs had a disadvantage in timing. When Cortez came, they were actually in the middle of harvest, which was a time period where the Aztecs were not usually prepared to fight. And because of that, Cortez had a much easier time coming through. Another reason is that they had been weakened by some unknown epidemic. We don't know what it was, but there was some disease that swept through the Aztec Empire, and so they were a little bit weaker than normal as well. Another reason, so those reasons were kind of piled on top of each other and made it easy for Cortez to defeat that was Bethy doing something over there, I'm not sure what, but it made it easy for Cortez to come in and take control of the Aztec Empire. Historians, when we talk about the defeat of the Aztecs, one of the other things they talk about is that the people of Mesoamerica just sort of lost their will to survive. The Mesoamerican people were defeated in battle, but one of the other things that happened when the Spaniards came in is they didn't just come in with the conquistadors, with the soldiers. They also came in with priests and missionaries who were very intent on completely obliterating the Mesoamerican culture. And because they lost the battles, and they lost their culture. They sort of lost the will to fight. The Mesoamericans couldn't practice many of their traditions or their religion openly, and because of that, they just sort of gave up and allowed the Spaniards to continue coming in and taking over. That's one theory, and I think it holds some weight. As Christians, we understand that when we go to teach when we go to spread the word of God around the world, we want people to be able to keep the parts of their culture that don't conflict with the Bible. But at this time period, the priests were not of that mind. They believed that anything that wasn't European culture was bad, and so they tried to wipe out everything and not just make Christians out of the Mesoamericans, but make Europeans out of the Mesoamericans. And because of that, you've got a lot of history and a lot of culture that's lost in this time period. And that is the end of this chapter. I hope that you had some good learning that happened. I hope that you found a lot of this interesting. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on your study guides. You're going to have a test, and then we'll start on chapter 12 after that, and that's going to be about Africa. So that's going to be a lot of fun to study, and I will see you next week.